Please let me open the session.
Yes.
Welcome back, dear guests. I hope you had a pleasant lunch break. Unfortunately, our first keynote speaker, Vera Marmaldi, will not able to attend our conference due to an important commitment. And then we will begin with our session with our speaker, Dr. Linda BIEK, Director of International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, who join us online to give their speech named Navigating Ethical Landscapes, Insights from IESBA on the philosophy of ethics and accounting. And before she begins, please let me read her short biography. Dr. Linda BIEK serves as a director for the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. For more than 25 years, Linda has contributed to various developments within the compliance function of audit regulation. As Director of Compliance for the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants and subsequent the Head of Investigations and Compliance for Hong Kong's Accounting and Financial Reporting, Linda was instrumental in developing tools and techniques for decreasing delays related to enforcement matters and promoting the efforts of both organizations in improving audit quality. Before relocating to Hong Kong, Linda represented the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, both nationally and internationally, as the key contact for developing and cultivating relationships with governmental and professional bodies to promote effective, efficient regulation of professional accountants. She also served as Executive Director of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy after working in the audit department of KPMG. Linda's doctoral research focused on the impact of mindset of auditors, professional skepticism when assessing complex auditing estimates, and her passion lies in helping accountants and auditors do the right thing. Is that true, madam? Everything is fine?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, also known as IESBA. And I'll discuss a little bit about how we prepare ethical standards for the global profession. So, here are just a few questions that we're going to try to address today. So, maybe you've wondered about these, so hopefully I'll shed some light on them. Now, as you may know, IESBA is an independent standard-setting body that operates under the auspices of the newly formed International Foundation of Ethics and Audit. Our mission is to serve the public interest by setting high-quality ethics and independent standards for professional accountants worldwide and by facilitating the adoption and implementation of those standards. To achieve this mission, IESBA and professional accountants around the world are influenced by various approaches, theories, and disciplines that inform an understanding of ethics and its role in accounting and auditing. Let me briefly mention some of them. First, professional accountants are guided by the fundamental principles of professional ethics, which are integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. These principles are based on the values of honesty, fairness, trust, and responsibility, and they provide ethical decision-making in accounting and auditing. I'll discuss these 5 fundamental principles a little bit later in our presentation. Second, IESBA, informed by stakeholder theory, recognizes that professional accountants have a responsibility not only to their clients and employers, but also to the wider society and the public interest. That means that we consider the impact of our standards on various stakeholders, such as investors, regulators, auditors, educators, and the public at large. And we seek their input and feedback through extensive consultation and outreach processes. As an indicator of the focus of public trust, that the IESBA Code of Ethics actually begins in the very first section by noting the responsibility for professional accountants to act in the public interest. A third approach that I want to share is that we're influenced by the interdisciplinary nature of accounting and auditing, which draws on knowledge and insights from various fields, such as economics, law, psychology, sociology, and philosophy. This means that we keep abreast of the latest developments and research in these fields, and we collaborate with other standard setters and experts to address emerging ethical issues and challenges in the dynamic and complex accounting environment. These are just some of the approaches that shape our work at IESBA. Of course, there are many others that we could mention, but hopefully this gives you a sense of the diversity and richness of the sources of information that inform our preparation of the IESBA Code of Ethics. So let's go to the second question. What's the process that's followed in preparing ethics standards? I'll give you a second to just look at this map because there's a lot of content on there. So a very colorful map, and you'll see this lovely globe that reflects kind of the influence of the Code of Ethics. Now, let me just kind of share that the International Federation of Accountants, which is IFAC, you may be aware of them, they report that there are approximately 2 million professional accountants in the world. 2 million professional accountants. So that's a lot of diversity. If you see on the screen, you'll see that more than 130 jurisdictions comply or adopt or use the Code of Ethics. Again, a lot of jurisdictional diversity if there weren't something that brought everybody together. And that's what the Code of Ethics does. I want to share a little bit about an article I read by Phil Copperthwaite. He's a past IESBA board member, and he also authored an article on the importance of culture. And within that article, he looked at, and this article was written maybe 15 plus years ago, but he talked about the composition of standard setting bodies and how so often standard setting bodies reflect a certain demographic. And so if they reflect just one specific demographic of the population, that's how the standards are going to be written. And they may not necessarily be properly reflective of all of the other cultures around the world that participate in the global market or the global economy. So he pointed that out in his research. And it's nice to note that between when he wrote his article and now, the diversity of the board has increased tremendously. We have 18 board members. They are from, I think, 16 different jurisdictions around the world. I believe almost every continent is represented. As you'll see here, the code has been translated into approximately 40 languages, including all major UN languages, and adopted by the largest 34 international networks of firms for transnational audits. So we're seeing a lot more diversity. And let me speak just a little bit more about what happens when we're focused on just one specific culture or one specific jurisdiction. And I'll speak to a sad incident that happened a number of years ago, and it involved a plane crash in Guam. And what had happened is basically what happened is you had the captain of the plane and you had the co-pilot and the other crew members, the navigator. So as they're approaching their landing in Guam, the navigator and the co-pilot recognize that they're on course to basically hit a mountain. And they try to signal this to the pilot, but because of the culture and the language, this was a Korean jet, and so the Korean language was used in the cabin. Because of the hierarchy and the balance of power that is just incorporated into that language, they were not able to be disrespectful to the pilot to just say, we're going to crash into a mountain. And as part of my research for my dissertation, I actually read some of the transcript, some of the FAA transcript from this incident. And you can see that up until almost the very end, the co-pilot and the navigator are trying to gently indicate that maybe the pilot should rethink something. Maybe the pilot should look at this. And it wasn't until like just a few seconds before the crash that I think they really spoke out, but it was too late. So this kind of speaks to culture and how deep culture runs within us. And the more diversity we have, and the FAA and the Korean airlines have looked into that incident and have made changes to address that. But that kind of speaks to culture and the importance with that particular culture of not speaking up or speaking out to your superiors. So again, culture is very important in shaping standards, and I think it's a very interesting research topic, and I know we've got a lot of academics in the crowd, and this might be an area in which you would want to point your students to maybe do some research. There are several articles out there about the difference in wording structure within the standards. I believe one of the studies is, it might actually be Australia and Korean. The professional accounting organizations work together to do a survey about how certain words were perceived in the different jurisdictions. And there's some very interesting findings there. So I would certainly suggest you look into culture more with respect to standard setting, and possibly something that you want to share with your students. So the main message here is just the code of ethics applies to all professional accountants. It is principles based, because to have a global standard or a global set of standards, you're going to have to rely on principles, the basic principles. If we get too far entrenched in the rules, then you've got diversity of practice just by the way those rules may be carried out in a specific jurisdiction. We have a robust approval process, and I'll speak to that, I think, just very briefly right now, and maybe a little bit more when I talk about sustainability. Essentially, the IESBA is always looking at emerging issues. So what do they need to consider next? What do we need to look at as far as standard setting, as far as guidance? And out of that continuous loop of research and assessment, we would develop a strategic work plan. And within that work plan, we would identify what we believe are the most pressing issues for the profession and for the public interest. We would consult on that strategy and work plan and open that up to the public. And we just finished our strategy and work plan for 2024 to 2027. And through that, we identified the projects that we'll be working with, and I'll speak to those later. After identifying those projects, then we will assign a project team, we will do a work stream, and that's when a lot of the work goes into one specific issue. Like right now, we're working with sustainability, and we've gone through the exposure draft process, and now we're assessing the comments that we got back from the exposure draft. We will use them to inform how we amend the proposed standard that we had put out. Then after that, the board will take several iterations until they get to a point where they feel they have the best standard possible. After they launch that standard and it's been effective for a few years, then the board will come back and do a post-implementation review to determine if any modifications need to be made and to make sure that the standard is working as expected. So again, a very robust approval process. And as I mentioned previously, the standards are adopted in more than 130 jurisdictions. Give you a second to look at this. Now, these are the building blocks of the code, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this, but I think the most important thing to point out is you have different parts for different purposes. The first part is the conceptual framework and the fundamental principles. That is the framework, that is the foundation. Part 1 applies to all professional accountants. You go to part 2, it's specific to professional accountants in business. Part 3 is to accountants in public practice. Then a little bit more specific, you go to parts 4A and 4B, and those are for professional accountants who perform assurance work. And then our newly created part 5, which is still in the proposal and development stage, is going to be about ethics for sustainability. So I mentioned the fundamental principles and the conceptual framework as part of part A in the code. And it's so important. If you don't look at anything else in the code, please understand the fundamental principles and how to apply the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework just really tells you, helps you evaluate threats. First, it helps you identify potential threats to these fundamental principles. It helps you then assess those threats, and then it helps you decide what you need to do to eliminate those threats or to decrease the risk to an acceptable level. Now, these 5 fundamental principles plus independence are, like I said, they are the framework, they are the key. And let me just share very quickly, let's pick out confidentiality. That's one fundamental principle. And you may say, that's obvious. I know that the information that I work on has to be confidential. I can't be out there and be talking about, what my business is projecting for the next quarter, or as an auditor, I can't talk about my client's work. Well, that's obvious, but you know what? We don't always think about the stuff that's not obvious. And I'll share an example that happened to a friend of mine almost 30 years ago. He was a lawyer, an attorney in the US, and he had walked into his law firm one morning and said hello to one of his friend's grandmother. His friend's grandmother was in the law firm. She was a client of the law firm, and he just casually said hello to her. That was lovely. At lunchtime, he had lunch with the grandson of that client, the woman that he had said hello to that morning. Had lunch with the grandson of that woman and said, I saw your grandmother in the law office this morning. It was so good to see her. And that was all that was discussed. Nothing about her business or anything like that. Unbeknownst to my friend, there had been a lot of drama surrounding the grandmother's will. And the grandmother was actually in the office to change her will. And while my friend wasn't aware of that, everybody in that family was aware of that. And when they had confirmation that she was in the office, they knew why she was there. My friend was fired at the end of the day. So these are things I want to highlight to help you understand that it's not just surface level, that oftentimes these fundamental principles go down. So you need to look at the root cause of certain issues. Also, I want to touch on really the concept of ethics. Oftentimes people say ethics can't be taught. All right, ethics can't be taught. It's something you're raised with. Well, that's arguable. There is a school of thought that says you have morals and you have ethics. All right, morals and ethics. Morals are developed in your formative years. These are personally ingrained in you by your religion, your family, the way you grew up. And those morals help shape life decisions. And they, yes, can influence your ethical behavior, but you can still have not, you can have questionable morals and good ethical behavior. Why is that? Because ethics is actually a more defined, prescribed mechanism for behavior within a profession, an industry, an organization. So it's something that has been set out as kind of a code of appropriate behavior. And with that in mind, that tells us that ethics can be taught because organizations and professions and industries do set out these codes of ethics. I also want to share a really interesting study that was performed by a professor from Notre Dame. And this was done several years back. It was a Notre Dame professor and several other professors. And what they did, they looked at the securities market. So those individuals that sell securities within the United States, they were able to collect over, I think, 2 million pieces of data over a number of years to help with their research. And what they looked at was the securities exam, the exam that is required for individuals to sell securities in the United States. And I think in 2010, there was a change in that exam. So before 2010, most of the training that was done was about ethical issues, being able to address ethical issues that arise in the sale of securities. Post 2010, the exam was focused more on these different types of investments and what they mean and how you deal with them. So the ethical component was decreased. So these professors actually, as part of their research, looked at whether one group made more ethical decisions or demonstrated more ethical behavior than another group. And their findings actually revealed significant findings such that those who passed the ethics focus exam were 1/4 less likely to commit misconduct than those who passed the later version of the exam. So I want to repeat that. Those who passed the ethics focus exam, the pre-2010, were 1/4 less likely to commit misconduct than those that passed the later version of the exam. So I found that to be very interesting. And also they said that they were able to note that it wasn't just compliance. They weren't just complying with the code. This ethical behavior actually was demonstrated in other facets of their work life. In fact, they were more likely to leave a job if there were ethical concerns within that job. So that was a very interesting study I wanted to share with you. Now, just a little quick question to break up the time. So this is a real life scenario that I encountered when I was in Hong Kong working for the compliance department for the HKICPA. Under what circumstances is it acceptable for a CPA to serve as a CFO of a company that he audits? A, when he's not compensated for the CFO role. B, when he declares his lack of independence. C, never. D, when the assignment as CFO is temporary. I hope you all know the answer to this question, which is never, never. Never. This is a clear violation of independence, and it is kind of surprising to know that this actually happened. And actually, as his defense, the professional accountants claimed that he wasn't compensated for the CFO role and that the assignment was simply temporary. He was helping out a friend. That was his defense. So don't fall victim to those types of situations. This is the conceptual framework. Now, this is obviously a very meaty slide, and I'm not going to get into it in depth because we're running tight on time, but essentially the conceptual framework allows professional accountants to identify, evaluate, and address threats to the fundamental principles. Because as we know, you know what, transactions are becoming more and more complex, relationships are becoming more and more complex, and it's not as simple as it used to be able to identify whether there might be, a threat to confidentiality or a threat to objectivity. So this conceptual framework really is helpful in allowing professional accountants to kind of methodically work through the situation and figure out, are there threats? If so, how do I address those threats? And to apply this conceptual framework, PAs need to have an inquiring mind, exercise professional judgment, and use the reasonable informed third-party test. So another little question. We just now talked about threats. What does a threat look like? So a credible plan for entering a high margin market, so that would be a risky market, will satisfy the board of directors and shareholders. The CEO has promised sizable bonuses if the team can get the job done, whatever it takes. So again, the conceptual framework talks about threats. So what type of threat would this scenario represent? So officially, we've said this was taken from one of our training tools, and we've said that it's a self-interest threat, because if you're on that team, you have a self-interest in your payroll check and your money. And so you may look at this and say, wow, okay, I can get a bonus if I just turn the other way and let this plan go through. Others that have answered this question have also said intimidation threat. Potentially you've got a CEO that's intimidating you, because on the flip side of bonuses, what this message might be saying is, if you don't get this done, you won't be working for this company any longer. And that's potentially a bit of a threat. Also, I think this comes to the reasonable informed third party test that was in the previous, well, I'm not going to go back, but anyway, on the previous slide. how would how would a reasonably informed third party evaluate the situation if he hears about this? You know, you got a CEO that's really strongly encouraging people to approve a plan without necessarily doing all the work that needs to be done. How would they look at this situation? And if they would question the professional accountant's objectivity and integrity, then it may be time for the professional accountant to either escalate that situation to the board or to some form of oversight body, or for that individual to leave the company, because it probably does represent a culture that is focused more on profit than on public interest. All right, so we're getting towards the end of the session. What changes are on the horizon for IESBA? These are our 3 priority IESBA projects. One is sustainability. The team has been working feverishly on sustainability and also on the work of external experts. They've been working on this for the past year and a half, and next week at our board meeting, the board will discuss the amended or the proposed exposure draft with amendments that reflect comments from stakeholders to the exposure draft. So it's going to be an exciting week next week. You can watch these board meetings online. So I definitely encourage you to tune in and take a listen to some of the discussions about sustainability. We're going to be covering that, I think, on Monday, Tuesday, and half day on Wednesday. Tax planning. Tax planning was approved in December 2023. So this year we're working on rolling out the tax planning standards. And there's been so much focus over the past few years about tax planning with the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers, some other jurisdictional issues, that the board really felt like they needed to step up and provide some more guidance with respect to ethical behavior in tax planning. So this hopefully will help professional accountants deal with that gray area where there's a lot of uncertainty. All right, so here we are, another polling question. Is sustainability just a fad? You know, it comes and it goes. So in June of 2021, IFAC released the State of Play in Sustainability Assurance. Now, according to the companies reviewed, how many reported some level of sustainability information? I think there were over 2,000 companies that were reviewed. So how many of them reported some level of sustainability information? I'll let you decide. All right, 91%. 91% of companies reviewed report some level of sustainability information. And that means that we need to address that. We need to, if this sustainability information is out there, IESBA wants to make sure that the professional accountants that are involved with that are making ethical decisions and demonstrating ethical behavior with regard to this sustainability information. It's important to note that of those 91%, 51% of the companies that report sustainability information provide some level of assurance on it. So as of today, there is sustainability assurance that is being performed on this information, but there isn't a common set of standards for assurance. That will be hopefully addressed very, very soon. Next week, the IAASB, the Audit and Assurance Standards Board, will be approving their sustainability assurance standards. So that means that there will be one set of standards for these 130 plus jurisdictions that follow not only our code, but the international audit and assurance standards. So that will be rectified. And then IESBA, let's see, I think I'm going to talk about that a little further. Let me just go to this next slide, talk about the global standards infrastructure. I'm sure you're familiar with the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. They put out S1 and S2, I believe it was a year and a half ago now. Maybe just a year ago. Anyway, those focus on disclosures related to sustainability information. So we're moving forward with standards in sustainability financial reporting. Next, we have the IAASB. As I said, they are going to to approve their sustainability standard next week. And then kind of at the foundation of those two would be IESBA's sustainability standards. So really, you know, the reporting and the assurance are minimized unless they sit on one common, robust international framework for ethics. Just very briefly, you've got the sustainability project and the experts project, which is really about using the work of experts, which will be commonplace in sustainability reporting and even sustainability assurance. The sustainability project is profession agnostic, meaning it is for anybody who is performing sustainability assurance work. And then we also have specific ethics provisions relevant to sustainability reporting and more general assurance. The work of that particular project team has been informed by excuse me, a sustainability reference group that is composed of people that work in the sustainability space. The experts project is just about making sure that those external experts are properly evaluated. Next, IESBA's work streams coming up. We will continue to work on sustainability. So we are anticipating approval of the final sustainability standard in December. And then we'll work in 2025 on helping jurisdictions adopt and implement these standards. We're also working on firm culture and governance. I talked earlier about more of kind of jurisdictional culture, but we also recognize that firm culture is very important. And we see that a lot of the problems that have arisen in assurance and tax planning over the years have been a result of a weak or a toxic firm culture. So IESBA feels compelled to address that in some way, shape, or form. Collective investment vehicles and pension funds. We are looking to see if the independent standards are sufficient or fit for purpose for these specific types of audits. And then we'll be rolling out the engagement team standards, the PI standards, technology standards in 2024, 2025 going forward. So lots is happening. There you go. We're IESBA. Also, I want to point out that if you visit our website, I don't know if you can see this, we have just launched, our 2024 handbook, I think a couple of weeks ago. So we certainly encourage you to look us up on the website, to follow us, and remember that ethics matters. So thank you so much for your time today. I don't know if there's time for questions, but if there is, I'll take them.
Thank you very much for your valuable contributions. The presentation was very inspiring from the ethical point of view. Although you only see me, there's a huge audience, but I wish I could show you, but I can't move the camera, but there's a big audience.
Good.
So please let me ask if anyone has a question for Mrs. BIEK. It seems like everything is very clear.
Good.
Thank you very much for your attendance. We appreciate it, madam. And our foundation has made a sapling donation in your name. We will send you the certification digitally. And thank you again for being here, for the time you have invested us.
It was certainly my pleasure, and thank you very much. And I hope you will definitely visit our website, visit our LinkedIn channel, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Thank you very much, madam.
Bye-bye.